Welcome back to the Way of the Wandering Wizard. I am, as always, Robert Andrew Meredith Kennedy. I am a pure and open channel for the finest vibrations of divine love and light, made manifest here, in service to Gaia and those who travel with her. Though most folks know me as Bob the Wizard, some Gandalf Bob the Wise, many more as that weirdo in the kilt, and a lot more besides. Some of them are now going, that bloke who sits there talking to his teddy bear. The only person who gives me sensible conversation sometimes. Right then, Growler. For those who haven't met him, this is Growler, my childhood teddy bear and my comfort blanket throughout this life. Comfort bear. Good, isn't it? He's here for a reason, because he most certainly becomes a physical anchor in the next little part of my journey. My last video I was describing my personal Armageddon and how, looking back at it 6 months later, I'm finally getting it. I thought it was a great punt anyway, but then I do these mainly to entertain myself, clearly. Throwing a little light on a tricky part of my life. Thankfully my brother, Raz, was there. And as things sort of semi-calmed down in the back of the ambulance, and I was negotiated, he'd managed to explain to him that clearly a lot of my reaction may well have been PTSD driven. It was his negotiation that got handcuffs taken from my back, which was agony, and brought round in front of me. The fact that apparently, and he told me that the other day, not only having had them put in front, I demanded that they unlock them to a position that I felt comfortable, where my wrists weren't being restrained and I could move. May sound like a bit of a demanding prisoner, but for me it was not an unusual experience. This is not the first time that I've been restrained in handcuffs in training, or in many other situations. The body keeps the score, as well as the body keeping the score with the PTSD. Luckily, he's a wise wizard, suitably trained in the other side, which is the training keeps that body in a position where there's a degree of choice, or if you react, it's quite quick. Now, part of me had obviously decided I wasn't going to fight my way out of the situation, so I'd have to talk my way out of the situation. Those of you who've watched the last 70 God knows episodes of this will know that I'll try and talk myself out of anything. Having been taken in the ambulance, I quite literally was reliving my accident. From a PTSD, the body was in the same place, it was in an ambulance. I was in pain, I was confused, I was all over the place. The difference with it was that in the ambulance, to a degree, I was mobile. I wasn't in a broken body, I wasn't physically incapacitated. The part of me that at the accident may well have wanted to fight, a natural human reaction, couldn't, too broken. That I was now almost reliving that physical experience now strikes me as something that had to happen in order to clear what I'd carried. It certainly wasn't intended on any conscious level, and absolutely horrific. Anyway, I digress. The lesson. That having gone through my complex negotiation, including Ayers Rock, which does still strike me as quite funny, trying to stay in touch with a distant brother maybe, who equally has his PTSD issues. Thankfully, these days, people start to recognise that some of those explosions could be about things that we've experienced. In fact, they almost invariably are. Did I help in de-escalating the situation? Apparently not. I was reactive, aggressive, rude, hyperly defensive, whatever you want to call it, for the next few days at least. My very little arrival, or memory of my arrival in hospital, I have a few snapshots, flashbacks. First one is being in the visitor's room, sitting on a settee, with 4 policemen, maybe 5 policemen around me, engaged, talking to them all night, for hours, trying to get inside their heads and get outside the door. I want to get out that door. You're not going out that door, right? I'll just start. I do this at work. Not so much these days, but I have done. Negotiation. Hostile negotiation to escape a situation was what was running through my head. That's the core training. It wasn't being run by this wonderfully eloquent advanced mind. It was being run by a screaming maniac. The stuff that was pouring out was gibberish. I know that sitting there now. Needless to say, I said at the time I was literally trying to make sense of whether I'd been hit by a car, because I was in hospital, so therefore I was dead, and this was some kind of, I don't know, abduction of my soul. Had I been physically abducted because of some alien conspiracy? That was all running. All of these false spheres of the mind just latching as this madness unfolded. And for the first time in my life, what was going on in my head was actually projecting out there. People's faces were changing. It was an intensely, as I sit here now, unnerving, if not terrifying event. The fact that at this point I'm sure that some chemicals to help calm me down had been administered, and that I have a natural fear of those chemicals, a fight of those chemicals, would have already driven a system, which, as I've mentioned before, was also being driven by an undiagnosed, deep underlying urinary tract infection. It was chaos. According to my record, apparently I went through mainly like a dose of salts. I laugh because it covers my shame. I'm by nature aware of my big size. I don't use it to my advantage that often. Certainly don't use it to intimidate poor mental health workers that are coming in, thinking in my mind that she was either some doctor that was about to inject me so that he could conduct experiments on me. I was absolutely in fear, paranoia at the time. Apparently, according to my medical record, at some point things started to calm down. I have a vague memory of a sergeant, an older figure, coming in saying, "You just settle down. Get some sleep, get some rest. You're not getting out through those doors. If you do, we'll jump on you again. And we'll restrain you and we'll bring you back into this room. Because you're under arrest, under a section 136. And although that didn't make a lot of sense to me at the time, my mind was not functioning. His authority I did understand. His understanding I understood. I think I may have said to him something along the lines of, if you were sitting in handcuffs and there were 4 hairy bikers staring at you, would you sleep? To which I think he said something along the lines of, fair point. One clear memory. The next moment after that, it's just a wash. I have no real record. Apparently I was then taken. I have a vague memory of going out for a smoke break with a great big security guard. And if you're watching this, or anyone even knows him, thank you. He took me out, thinking handcuffs again, probably cuffed to him. Gave me a cigarette and just outside and just let me cool down. I have a vague memory of looking at him going, what the fuck is going on? And a vague memory of him looking at me while his face swung and I was like, you were at the accident. I mean, he clearly knew that I was lost. I was lost between my accident and all of the events that had happened. Sitting outside a hospital, couldn't work out how I was physically outside a hospital that I'd been in, that I'd been broken. All of those memories are now all coming up. All of those journeys through the hospital corridors are all coming up. Everybody with masks, all coming up. To say that when all this shit needs to get sorted out, it was an intense experience. It was. Was taken to a secure unit for assessment. Was taken to the suite, as they say. I arrived at night. I was absolutely convinced that Armageddon had gone off. That this was some kind of post-Armageddon survivalist thing. that I'd clearly lost my plot in this new society, and that I was being held, or that we were all being held in some kind of weird bunker system. I didn't know what was going on. I have a vague memory of quite reasonably taking off my leaf string, covered in wax, weird clothes. I took off my necklaces and made a chain to my box of possessions, trying to maintain some kind of link to me. Nothing more, trying to keep hold of where my kit had gone, where my boots were. That kind of thing is still deep inside those of us that live these lives. Where's my kit? I'm going to need it. Apparently, all I have vague memories of, literally, I have a memory of lying on my bed whistling. The sound was amazing, probably on account of the many chemicals but by that point had been administered. And again, I've now, as much as we make choices in rational life, in that situation, yes, I experienced those chemicals. In no judgment, I understand that people administer those, that the service administer those, because that is how they feel it works. I was in no fit position to argue, and I certainly wasn't in a fit mental state to argue my case, as I will later do. Not in that extremis. Could I have done with a window to try and get diagnosed with a UTI treated for that before all of this lot kicked in? Probably. Would it have aided me in clearing all of my shit? No. Which is why it happened. I've realised that in my life more than anything. When I look back and go, why? I can see why it happened. As unpleasant, as uncomfortable, as terrifying for myself and those around me it can be, I can see the reason for it. It was to clear my shit. Now, I have vague memories of wandering round this week, pressing buttons, pressing alarms, getting people to come out, making demands for various things, seeing how far I could push, where the soft limit is, where the hard limit is, how I was going to formulate my escape plan. I was trying to read the space through weird states of consciousness, although I was much calmer, a little bit reactive, but I certainly wasn't the maniac that had been present a few hours before. From my medical record, this is. I was highly erratic. Was certainly bouncing between light and dark. Clearly in the middle of deep psychosis. As everything, what poured out of my mouth, believe me, could have been anywhere on that spectrum. In fact, there were reports of me claiming to be on the spectrum and very sage notes saying, we don't doubt that. At the time I was on a spectrum, believe me. I was seeing colours and experiencing things I've never experienced before, well, certainly not consciously. Bouncing, light and dark. After my assessment, it was decided quite clearly that I couldn't just return to my family. There was something deeply wrong. I wasn't even capable of understanding the acts that I was being held by. What was going on at all? Said I was absolutely trapped in my own paranoid delusion of capture and being drugged, being experimented on, and it didn't really matter whether that was here or on the moon or in some alternate dimension. That's what I was experiencing. I felt that I'd been tortured. I made several claims of it, whether it was the place or whatever else, because that's what I was experiencing. What I was actually physically remembering was quite sensibly a relatively well done restraint of a clearly chaotic character. As all of this played out and I'd landed in the unit, my brother, my good lady, bless him, highly concerned for my well-being, managed to get in for a visit. I don't know, from what they tell me, what they visited certainly wasn't me. Wouldn't even speak to my brother until he gave me coded words that they got ground into me. A few familiar clothes. I still felt trapped in some kind of hostile imprisonment. I was trying to make good my escapes. My report doesn't read well. I'd be around in highly emotive states. At times I was found literally wandering, teddy bear in hand, to be taken back to my room. At night, or while I laid on my bed, I was pouring through a series of nightmares which I'll cover in Rude Awakenings, because I don't want to bring that up when I'm tied in this particular part of my tale. What went on in my mind will be one for a future episode, as I make sense of why those experiences happened. I say they were some dark days. I'd literally got to the point where I thought that I was being fed, and as well as these strange tablets that were making me go through these, or certainly aiding the process of these heightened states of awareness and catastrophic crashes as I bounced in and out of reality. As I said, in reflection, for a purpose. But at the time, not easy to experience. Excuse me while I take on board some more tea. Strange dreams aside, I managed to speak to my brother that they were feeding me wasps. The reason they were feeding me wasps, because apparently, even though I had no real memory at the time, because it was bouncing all over the place, I'd managed to speak to my mum and told her that whatever experiments they were conducting on me, the repeated, cover that, each night I was reliving accidents, deaths, ego deaths, spread throughout space and time. I'll share a few with them in the future episode. I was absolutely convinced that the experiments were going wrong and that soon I'd be physically gone from this world. There was blood in my urine and blood in my faeces. Poo in blood and wee in blood. That's never a good sign, folks. It was reported through. They took a test and clearly there was a problem. Though the sample never grew any particular pathogen, there was matter present, and I was treated with antibiotics in addition to a range of antipsychotics, psychotropic drugs as they're called, many of which were aiding that journey, light and dark. Now, I don't know how they work. If the object of the game is to basically bounce people from one end of the extreme to the other end of the extreme until they become utterly exhausted and settle for some consensus middle ground, it sort of worked. In fact, actually, no, it didn't. So if I'm accurate and I look back at my notes on my medical record, it was around that point, as the UTI was treated, that the good psychiatrist suggested that they reduce the amount of medication, just put me on to the antibiotics and a mild sedative and see whether, I don't know, the regime that I was currently on, my medication regime, was either masking something or driving something. For that I'm very thankful. It was about that point that things started to calm down. They were very, very weird at times, but there'd be gaps of me. My behaviour was highly erratic. I'd run around the place quite literally with packs of cards going home, the ace of spades and the ace of hearts. I don't know, some kind of trying to explain who I am, even in that deranged state. It was most definitely a challenge, which I will cover in my next video, which will be Rude Awakenings. Thank you for listening to my version, or my experience, of a psychotic breakdown, of the moment where all my shit came up to get sorted out, despite the hard work many years before. As I sit here now, in reflection, it was needed. It's put me into a place that I didn't think I'd ever be able to get back to before, by accident. So, thanks again for listening. Take care, go well, blessed be. This is Bob the Wizard and his able sidekick, Growler the Bear, signing off.